Start your grow upgrade here in ParGrow, an affordable and easy-to-use family of StoneWool products by Grodan. ParGrow is your stepping stone for transitioning into steerable, consistent StoneWool, with the reassurance of Grodan's 50 years of knowledge, plus our trustworthy customer service and technical support. ParGrow products include popular block and slab sizes and are made from basalt rock, in black and white foil with small and mid-sized growers in mind. This StoneWool's vertical fiber structure affords a fast saturation for quick rooting in and strong root development without the need for complex irrigation schedules. And when you're ready to dig deeper into root zone management, Grodan makes it simple to add GrowSense suite sensors together with monitoring software, so you can produce high-quality crops using your own recipe with even more precision. Save time and money, save on water, get more harvest per year in cleaner rooms. Leave soil, peat, or cocoa in the past. Your future in StoneWool starts here in ParGrow. ParGrow by Grodan, designed to grow.
So here we have the 50 cell tray, and it has been prepped. It's been soaking in a roughly 1.5 solution at like a 5.8 EC per the manufacturer's recs. And as you can see, these trays in this quad thick fit very nice. You don't get that weird bulge out on the sides that you do with a lot of other kind of pre-filled trays. So we really like these. We are super excited that Grodan came out with these this year. This is a January product. So this is like one of the first shipments that's been out, and we've been seeing killer results with them all across facilities.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Marco Jimenez. I am the Director of Content and Video Production here at Growers House and CannaCribs. I want to officially welcome you guys to the Growers House Ag Solutions webinar featuring our host and CannaCribs Technical Crop Advisor, Mike Chang. Mike and I will be joined today by our guests, Ben Feldman, the crop specialist from Grodan, and Lee Bossard, head of cultivation over at High Grade USA based in Phoenix, Arizona. Quick shout out to all our CannaCribs fans out there. Thank you all for supporting the channel over the years. We're almost topping 290,000 subscribers today, which is amazing. Nate and the team are immensely grateful for the love and support over the years. Thank you all so much. We recently filmed 3 episodes in Maryland at Culta, SunMed, and District Cannabis. So those will be coming out very soon. We're actually launching in July. I believe SunMed will be the first on the docket. It's a pretty amazing facility. We met with Jake and Justin and the team out there, and they've got some really cool stuff to show you guys. Most of these cultivations don't allow these kind of inside peeks behind the curtain. So we're excited to share that with you guys. This series this webinar series is brought to you guys by Growers House Ag Solutions. Please consider our Growers House Ag Reps and CannaCribs Technical Crop Advisors as your trusted source for home and cultivation solutions. For enterprise support by industry professionals, contact Renee and her team, and they will take great care of you guys. Or you can just go ahead and visit us at growershouse.com, click on the commercial tab, and you can learn a whole bunch more there. We've also recently launched our new B2B portal platform where commercial customers can get custom quote carts, shopping carts, requisition lists, order history, special tiered pricing, list creation, and the ability to ship to multiple addresses around your facilities, or MSOs that are starting to spring up more and more nowadays. You guys will have a commercial account manager at your side the entire way. So check it out. It's really, really interesting new feature that we have on our website there. I'm going to bring our industry experts on in a second, but I just wanted to familiarize you guys with the webinar platform itself. If you're new to Big Marker, which is the hosting platform for this, we have most of our stuff for you guys is on the top right there. We've got the chat if you guys want to chat to each other, if you want to chat to us, if you have any questions, which we encourage in the Q&A, you just hit that Q&A button up there, ask your questions there. And after the presentation, we'll stop and take some time to answer those questions for you guys. I also have a couple fun polls up there, just kind of curious to see where you guys are at. And then we've got a ton of handouts. Definitely encourage you guys to go ahead and download those. We've got a bunch of nice kind of one sheets that I made for some Growers House Ag in house brand products that are available if you guys are interested. And also Ben and his team, Colleen and the folks from Grodan have provided a bunch of really nice information on Grodan 101 products. Some of the stuff you'll see on today's webinar are up there for you guys to take a look at, but go ahead and download any and all of that stuff throughout the webinar at your leisure. And Ben was also kind enough to create a huge presentation deck for us for this webinar. We pared it down a little for the sake of the time we have today, but it's also available up there for you to download. So a lot of great information. I encourage you guys to grab it. It's all free, and there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and turn Mike's camera on right now and audio. And there he is. What's up, Mike?
Oh, hey, how's it going? Good to see you again, Marco.
New haircut for those that haven't seen you in a month.
Yeah, I got a little hot here in Arizona. I had to get rid of some stuff. I had to drop a little weight here.
Yeah, you guys are burning up out there, man. I think it's cooled off a little today, but yeah, I know I've been watching the weather, and it's been brutal. So anyways, welcome, Mike. How have you been?
Good. Yeah, staying busy here. I'm looking forward to talking about Grodan a lot, actually.
I know this has been fun, fast and furious. Well, I've been very busy the last couple of weeks, and I think this one came together very nicely in the last couple of days. So, just kind of for the audience that is new today or watching on YouTube or whatever down the road, Mike and I started this webinar series about a year ago, really with the idea, to bring free education to the cannabis industry through our platform. It's a nice tool that a lot of our customers and clients have been using and sharing lately, which is great. I basically started this, Mike, when I was sitting through our CannaCribs consultant weekly meetings we were having, and I was like, we got to record this. Like this there's too much knowledge on these calls, for us not to share with the world. So that's more or less the inception of the idea. And I'm super grateful that you guys allowed me to bring this idea to the forefront. I wanted to ask you really quick about the lunch and learns we're having in Phoenix. I know you said we don't really have anything specific lined up next month. We're going to talk to Renee about that, but for folks that are possibly in the Phoenix area, can you talk a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah, basically we like to bring our local growers in and try to disseminate this information basically person to person. We had some Grodan reps come out. It was great. We got some lunch, got some pita and stuff, but importantly, growers were able to ask questions directly to these Grodan reps, find the best practices, kind of explain how they're using it and see if there's any optimization there. Because, it really should be on everyone's responsibility to elevate this industry and ensure that we're consistently putting out the best product we can and, not overspending or not spending on the wrong products and using them incorrectly. So it's a good opportunity for these growers to come in on a specific topic, ask the questions about that specific topic and get the answers directly from the guys' mouth. Nice.
So it's kind of like a mini version of what they would experience if they called you as a CannaCribs consultant, and get a taste of the knowledge that you guys provide for customers to help build new facilities. Okay, great. That's exciting. Well, if you guys are in the Phoenix area, we will check out social media. I'm not sure if we're announcing them on the websites. Maybe we can add a little pop out there for next month or something, but definitely check those out. They're very informative, and you get a one-on-one opportunity to meet Mike and various partner vendors that we have. So okay, cool, Mike. Well, this is where I typically bow out and then come back at the Q&A, and I will allow you to take over from here. Ben and Lee are kind of waiting in the background, so I'm going to go ahead and turn their mic and cameras on. And then I will let you introduce them and then start the slide presentation, and then I'll see everybody at the Q&A session. So Let me go ahead and turn all this stuff on, and I'll see you guys very soon. Welcome, Lee and Ben.
Hey guys.
How's it going, guys?
Thanks for joining
Nice
us
to see
today.
you.
Yeah.
Good
Let's
to
go
see you
ahead
guys.
and get the slide deck up if we can, Marco, on that first slide. And we'll get our introductions in here. Ben from Grodan, one of the Grodan crop specialists, which kind of, if you can explain what that entails and what you do for Grodan, please.
Sure. So, yeah, my name is Ben Feldman. I've been an advisor with Grodan for about 3 years. I work intimately with the cultivators. We're always trying to figure out how we can, not only professionalize the industry a little bit further, but how can we take it to the next level? And it's not always about grams per square foot. I'm looking how we can do energy cost savings. I'm looking how we can, save on other inputs like fertilizer, water. That's kind of like our bread and butter. And then, of course, we're always looking at how we can improve the product. And so working with people like Lee and really understanding, with somebody who's got such a good handle on it, what the pain points might be, we take those opportunities to improve upon the product. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to make the product as best as possible for everybody in the cannabis realm.
Awesome. And going right to Lee. So Lee, you are the director of cultivation over at High Grade here in Phoenix, one of the premier cultivators of like large scale quality cannabis. Can you just explain your roles over at High Grade and your experience so far working there and with Grodan?
I've been with High Grade for about 8 years now. We started back in 2016. I've worked with several other companies, other mediums and whatnot, but the consistency that I've gotten from Grodan and all the help from guys like Ben is unmatched with any other companies. They definitely helped me out. My facility was kind of built in 3 different phases, so I almost have like 3 different grows with all different unique parameters and whatnot. But keeping that medium consistent that Grodan provides is second to none.
Awesome. And when you mean other medias, are you talking about other StoneWools or other types of intermedia?
Both. StoneWool, cocoa, peat, all that stuff.
Yeah, I imagine in 8 years' time, you guys definitely wanted to kind of try things out and see what worked optimally in your facility. And it seems like here 8 years later, you've landed on Grodan. You guys are very successful.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So, diving right into it then, just for the sake of time, because I always feel like we never have enough time for these, I feel. But the what and why of StoneWool. So, Ben, this is going to be a big slide for you. Just talking about the history of Grodan and the inception, and honestly, I would like to talk about the benefits of some products like StoneWools versus like soils or cocos or any other type of quote unquote inert hydroponic media. Ben, can you explain the history of StoneWools and Grodan?
Sure. So Grodan was the original StoneWool manufacturer. I believe it was around 1969. That was a time period where we were trying to add things like methyl bromide into the soil to be able to clean up pathogens, right?
Yeah.
And so it was pretty nasty, and specifically that one was eating holes in the ozone. And so out of that came, we need to find a product that's clean, that's not going to be introducing pathogens into the greenhouse. Well, it has to be inert. And we were in the business of insulation, and we found that this product, like if we tweak it a little bit, is really amazing for growing crops out of. So however many years later, we're still here today. We're really trying to, we're still pioneering the way of StoneWool. For a lot of people, it's the ability to bring something clean into the facility. It's the ability to start the substrate out with the amount of nutrition that you're trying to put into it. We're removing that variability. Block to block or slab to slab, the substrate is very uniform. When you deal with other substrates, you might have like different sized chips in there. The particulate size might be different. They might be sourced from different places. All of that creates some level of variability. So for people that are in the high-tech growing world and they're looking for that level of consistency, Grodan is here to offer that.
And that makes sense because it's completely uniform throughout the cube, whereas like in a bag of cocoa or in a bag of soil, you have various particle sizes, various CEC capability of those different types of particles, things like that. So you're kind of like you're kind of navigating a little bit through darkness, whereas with Grodan you kind of have this one path, and you just got to make sure that you're on the path that you want for that substrate. And one thing that I really want to push right now especially is it's free of endophytes. You know, you can get a soil from someone, but you don't know how long that's been sitting in a warehouse or out in the sun usually. You can get cocoa from a source, but is it from Sri Lanka, this lot, or is it from India, this lot? It's hard to find consistency so that you're good cycle over cycle, year over year. Whereas with Grodan, it's kind of always consistent, so you can kind of plan ahead a lot easier.
I agree 100%. And I think that Grodan takes it a step further too. When you're dealing with what I want to say, more traditional substrates that have a bunch of, tannins involved, if we're looking at cocoa, right? Like that's very hard to filter out of your irrigation system. So legislation in other parts of the world is starting to realize that we need to reclaim, recapture, purify water that we've already used. Oh, yeah. And it's going to make its way to North America or the US at some point, right? And with our products, since it's so clean and what you put through it comes out, it's very easy to recycle the water that you've been using. And I think that's going to be a major, point for cultivation going forward in the United States.
Right. And of course, like with the moisture gradients with rock wool being so consistent, it allows growers to have something very predictable so that they can plan their irrigation accordingly, plan their overhead costs for that year as far as irrigation and nutrients accordingly. Lee, did you have any big differences when it came to like the water hold capacity or inertness between different types of media that you saw operationally?
Absolutely. Some of the other brands that I've used wouldn't hold water that well, and some of them, even started to like literally disintegrate. And that was kind of when I switched over to using Pargros. And again, the consistency with those blocks, is so unmatched compared to other brands out there. Yeah. Every box you get, every pallet is always consistent. And that's one thing that I value a lot with Grodan. Not only that, but the water holding capacity of the blocks are so much better than all the other brands as well too.
Yeah, and I think a uniformity plays a lot into that. Like one thing I always tell growers when they're looking at different StoneWools is like put that cube right in front of you and look at the grain of the actual fibers. And one thing that you'll notice consistently with Grodan is the grains all go one way and there is an even distribution. And a lot of other cubes I see like it's really fluffy on one side and super dense on one side, so making sure you look at that grain in your media kind of like can give you insight in how consistent that's going to be when you actually run it operationally, I feel, right?
Absolutely.
And so this slide right here, I wanted to talk about the differences between the main products that Grodan's really providing for the cannabis industry, which is going to be the improved blocks and the Pargro blocks. I've heard a lot of anecdotal experience and evidence, or not evidence, but kind of like, water cooler talk about how one is this way and one is that way and how people don't like it. Can you fully explain the differences from a technical aspect, Ben, between the improves and the Pargros?
Sure. So like just out the gates, the Pargro, like that technology has been around for a while. It's tried and it's proven. The main thing that sets the two different apart is how we have essentially bound the wetting agent to the fiber itself. So in our flagship product, the improved, that's our newest technology. The wetting agent is essentially bound to the fibers and it allows for, much more uniform water content over the height of the block. And then of course, one thing that we are always trying to do is we don't want to see that efficacy go down over time. And in a traditional StoneWool, which everybody's using, we're using the, it's essentially held between the fibers, the water agent is. The efficacy can decline over time. But in the newest improved product that we have, it's really bound to the fibers and you can dry out a product and be able to bring it back without the fear of, losing the capacity to steer.
Got it. So it's a little bit more forgiving with the improved blocks. And not only is it more forgiving, but that you bring up a really cool point. The height of water in the cube is a big deal because gravity is a thing. And just like we saw on the previous slide, there is a moisture gradient in your media. So if you're in a situation where you do need like a smaller media size, having that better water holding capacity must be kind of a game changer.
It is. And, we're calculating the size of our blocks to accommodate for that delta in water content from the top to the bottom.
Got it.
And, we see a lot of people do things out there. People might go above 6 inches. That can be okay. There are situations where that's all right. But we've really noticed that a height of 6 inches of really any substrate, the gradient from top to bottom gets to be very significant.
Right.
And yeah, it's a super important trait that we're always trying to work on homogenizing.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of pots where the first half of the soil or cocoa just is nothing. It's just inert. It's wicking up salt, and all the root action is down low where the actual water is being held. So by having that block saturate all the way to the top, it kind of like you're not wasting block space, I feel.
Exactly.
Okay. Lee, you've used both par grows and improves in your grow, right? What were the kind of operational differences that you found, and why do you use the one that you use now?
I currently use the par grows. I like Ben said that, if you do have some issues with irrigation, it's a lot easier to bring those improved blocks back. With the par grows, if you get below that, 25-30% water content, you're probably not going to be able to hold the same water capacity that you did from the initial soak. Right. But if your irrigation is on point and you're not having any failed valves or anything like that, I do think the par grows are a good way to go. Or depending on how long you have your plants going for. If you're in Rockwell and you're doing 3-4 week veg or something like that, and then going into bloom, you might be better off with those improved blocks.
Right, because it gives you a better window of saturation, like capacity and capability.
For sure.
I know for a fact that your guys' irrigation setup over there is pretty high speed. So you guys don't really run into an issue where you have to switch your irrigation from here and there. You're not limited by how many shots you can give your plants. So the par grows probably work just fine for you because you can just continually ensure that you're at the right saturation point, right?
Yeah, we have a fertigation system, so my tanks are pretty much always full. So I don't have to worry about running out of water or anything like that. I'm not really limited on my tank size or a direct inject system. So if I need a water from lights on to lights off, I'm able to do that.
That's cool. Yeah, and you bring up a good point because a lot of guys are on direct inject and they don't have that capability. So it makes sense for them to maybe use the improved so that they can have less irrigation shots per day, but still maintain that high water gradient in that cube. Ben, one thing I want to talk to you about on this slide especially, and I wish if you're watching this right now, please download the slide deck. And if anything, print this slide or out because this information is so important in my opinion. So on a normal 6x6x6, this is in centimeters, but in America, it's a 6x6x6. We're looking at 2,650 grams, which roughly equates to about 2,650 milliliters of water. And that's your guys' advice in the water holding content of that cube?
So there's a couple of things here. All of our products in block form have a specified wet weight that you should obtain when you're doing the initial saturation. It does a couple of things. So it lets you know how well you did batch to batch. If you are, using big flood tables and you're flooding the blocks, it's usually pretty homogeneous. But if you're somebody out there who's using a watering wand and you want to know if you did a good job, you can take that block, you can put it on a scale, and it'll tell you how many grams it weighs. That amount of grams does correlate to a volumetric water content of the block. So when you start using your sensors and comparing them, you'll know out the gates that you started at the proper hydration level. I would say in the US, we struggled for a long time getting cultivators to reach that initial saturation properly. It's just, it's part of the learning curve. That conversation has gotten less and less as time's gone on for me. And we're really starting to make strides in our industry and, acknowledging the fact that we have to do such a good job from day one if we want to maintain that water content later on.
Awesome. And Just one quick question. So this weight right here, this 2,650 grams, is that the weight of a fully saturated cube of the GR32s?
So if that number represents how much that blocks, it's not necessarily full saturation. That number is the minimum saturation requirement that we want to see before you enter the field.
Okay.
So you can actually put you probably in the wheelhouse of about 82%, but you can push the number higher, but we just want to see that number so that we know starting at the gates that check one box that we're consistent.
Got it. And so that is good information, good advice, that is the lower threshold for that water content amount. And that is where you need to be at least. So yeah, if you guys are watching this, please get this, start weighing your blocks and see if you're doing that right. So moving right to the next slide. Go ahead.
I always say, like, don't get too far into the weeds, right? Like, if we say 2,650 and you get to 2,620, like, you're fine. But cool. Like, if you start the block and you're at, like, 2,200, you're going to run into a problem. And we need to make sure that we're getting that saturation correct.
Good to go. All right. So this is going to be a big slide for, I believe, Lee and Ben, but a lot on Lee because you are running these products currently and you are in operation and you guys have a very kind of like set irrigation strategy for how you guys are running par grows. Lee, can you talk a little bit about like vegetative steering, generative steering, and how important are those two aspects of steering versus just maintaining and ensuring that your initial program is more consistent?
Yeah, it's a fine line that you have to play with, especially on this scale. So, when you're in the beginning weeks, when you're trying to steer generative, I try and just limit my irrigation schedule, but I'm always trying to keep my cubes pretty wet. Mm-hmm. And then as I get into those middle weeks and I want to start steering a little bit more vegetative, I'll kind of broaden out that irrigation scheduling and start adding in more shots just to keep everything wet through lights on to lights off. It gets difficult when you're looking at your sensors and, you're only looking at 1% of maybe your entire room, if that,
Yeah, you got big rooms, yeah.
It's tough to make judgment calls based off of what one single plant is doing in a room full of them. And, you gotta find that happy medium of kind of going off your sensors as well as just having a general schedule to follow. That everything's gonna like. I do feel like you're better off keeping your cubes wet opposed to really trying to crop steer.
Right, and I think this goes back to what Ben said about the last slide. Keep it simple. Don't try to get too into the nitty gritty with this. And the main basis is this is a media that holds water and it holds the water for the plant, so it needs to have that water in it most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Ben,
So for me, there are a couple of pitfalls involved. Like, I always have to preface, like, stay off Instagram, people. Like, don't look at what people are doing on Instagram.
That's just good life advice. Yeah.
Give us a call and we'll talk through it. There's different schools of thought. Some people like to come out the gates and be generative the whole time.
Right.
People now for the past couple of years have been practicing, like Lee, for the first 2 weeks, you might practice being more generative, or 3 weeks. As we start to do the bud fill out, and we're trying to build bud development, you need water. So we might increase some of the vegetative actions there. And then as we enter ripening, we want to get more generative again. And we might want to, enhance the terpenes that we've got. We're looking for a certain assimilate balance. So people make those changes. But the longer that I do it, I like to kind of change the way that I think of steering. And I'm like focused on keeping the plant balanced. So how can I make sure that the amount of sources, the sinks, how much bud is, relative to the amount of leaves that you have and how much energy is being created. I'm trying to keep all of that in balance. And I like to implement those steering procedures, whether we're vegetative or generative, based on the desire to be a certain way, but not for the sake of just doing it. And I think that, for a lot of people that come out the gates and they just want to be super generative, it's really good job security for me, but it's really challenging for people to operate like that because, over time, the water content starts to go down.
Mhm.
You haven't been gaining the amount of water that you've been losing every single day.
Right.
Like it's
ECs start to stack up.
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
it's
So
difficult
it's
pushing
just
those.
important to keep in mind. Yeah, you don't always have to be pushing super generative or super veg. You can try to be more or less balanced or neutral,
Mhm.
Right.
I
And
agree with that
and still
for sure.
find immense success.
one of the things that one of our tier 2 consultants, Juan Gutierrez, told me a long time ago that was really important is steering is like the last kind of 20 to 10% of that irrigation plan. I feel like getting on the road and actually moving forward is 80%. And that involves just keeping that substrate at the right water content so that that plant has all of the necessary water, nutrients, salt balance within the roots to grow. And then you tweak the generative, like you said, Ben, based on what you're seeing in the morphology of the plant and how you want to steer that a little bit this way or that way, I feel.
Exactly. And the other thing is, like, we preach steering all the time, right? But like how you steer has to be in tandem with what your climate's doing too. So like generally when you're, and like substrate company, I try not to talk about climate too much, but there's a need. And when we change how we're irrigating, usually we need to make adjustments to the climate too. Everything is intertwined. Everything has to work together. All the cogs have to be turning for, the vehicle to go.
Right. And Lee, you mentioned something important about like the over dryback of certain cubes and like how they just don't come back. Like generally, what are you looking for as a minimum in your cube saturation? Now I'm talking in terms of like not sensor read, but kind of relative, like true terms of like what you expect that saturation to be as far as weight or water content. What's kind of the minimum thresholds that you're seeing in your facility as far as water content in your cubes?
Water content, I usually try and not go below, 30 to 35%. That's like the absolute lowest I'd like to go. If I can keep that closer to 40, I think that's more ideal. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes some strains, some plants, you're flirting close to that 30% line.
Mm-hmm.
But usually if I can get my water content back up to, to the 50s and 60s after my P1 shots, then I'm happy with that. And I'll just try and maintain that the best I can and not let them get too lower. However, things do happen. Sometimes you see stuff below that 30%, and you just got to try and keep it as wet as possible within those irrigation periods.
And one quick question on that low percentage. When during the cycle of the day are you seeing that low water content? Because what I see
at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, right?
Well, beginning. So like, right before lights are kind of
right
turning
after
on.
the night.
You've had that big dry back overnight. That's cool. Where I'm usually seeing the driest, obviously, and then hopefully those P1 shots are starting up right away to get everything back up to saturation.
Just like how we see on this P3 chart, that's when you should be at the lowest point. One thing that I'm seeing in a lot of facilities that breaks my heart is I'll walk into a room that still has 6 hours of light left and these cubes are at 30%. That plant has done growing for the day, and that cube is done soaking up the right amount of
water. A couple
water.
Hours ago.
Yeah, that's rough.
So yeah, this P1, P2, I know that Lee, you said you had very good irrigation equipment allowing you to do as many shots as you want. But Ben, can you explain exactly what this P1, P2, and P3 means and how it correlates with like how your e-Gro sensors are reading that?
Sure. So, Grodan developed a 3-phase irrigation model, just like how can we control the water content of the blocks. So phase 1 really begins your first irrigation of the day until you create drain. So, right, during that period, we're not trying to see water coming out the blocks. If you have water coming out the blocks, being able to increase the water content gets to be more of a challenge. Mm-hmm. You start using more water, you use more energy, removing moisture from the environment. Phase 1, we don't want to see any drain, and we're really trying to build up the moisture inside the substrate. At the same time, as we build the moisture back up in the substrate in that P1 phase, yesterday's salts are falling back into solution, which brings us into P2. So P2 is what I like to refer to as our maintenance phase. So we've reached the volumetric water content that we desire. Now we need to push out yesterday's salts, and we need to get to a nutrition level that is acceptable to the crop. P3, that is essentially where your last shot of the day begins to the first shot the next morning. A lot of people, this is like where they have that large generative dryback queue of like 15 to 25% overnight for, you know, if they're trying to be generative.
Yeah.
That's usually happening in P3. P3, what you do in P3 to P1 is really important. For me personally, when I see people having trouble controlling the water content of their blocks over time, this is where the utility of having something like the e-Gro and the GrowSense is so amazing. Is I can bring up the view, I can look at the water content in the substrate, and I can look at it for over 30 days. And so when we look at it like that, let's say day one, you plug your block and you're at, let's just, for easy math, let's say you're at 60%. Well, over the course of a month, if you've gone down 1 or 2% every day and you haven't reached that level again, it makes sense by the time you're a month and a half through your flowering crop that your water content is super low. And people might have, you know, like the product will look really nice. You'll have nice looking trichome development, but you'll have lackluster bud development where you're not creating enough water to be able to get to the plant. So that's where we look at the 3-phase model and why it's so crucial, you know, getting a good handle on phase 1, 2, and 3 and what that means. And also a little caution to people, because if you remember where I said P1 to P2, we're creating the water content in the block. And then as we enter P2, we start to push it out. I want people to know that we try not to base off the irrigation changes that we're making in that little framework of time, because the time where you have wetted up the block and the solution's getting saltier is a short amount of time over the 12 hours that the lights are on. And so we don't want to make a change based on fertilizer for that little window. We want to make sure that you're changing the, you know, your fertilizer composition and everything as you're in P2 and you're in that maintenance phase and you've got consecutive numbers to read with. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I think that is I think the true purpose of the P2 is kind of lost on a lot of people. They think that it's just got to maintain full saturation. No, it's not so much about maintaining full saturation, but it's giving yourself an opportunity to reset the ratio of nutrient balance in your root zone, to push out root exudates, to kind of increase the water content and reduce the salt content. So that P2 is very important for that resetting phase. And then, you know, you said one thing that really struck me is like, you know, when you saturate a block, you look at it at 60%, and a lot of guys, when they use the sensors, they'll have a fully saturated block and it won't show 80, 90%. And they'll be wondering what's going on. So could you explain what is going on when you have those sensors in the cube and why it might be beneficial to use a substrate sensor that was specifically designed for your substrate?
So Mike, that's a good point. Everybody who's watching, just know when you're talking to your reps and you're looking at sensors, all sensors have to be calibrated for a specific type of substrate. For us, with the GrowSense suite and the e-Gro, it's all been calibrated for our substrate. Our substrates could come in different types of densities. Fiber orientations could be changed. All of these things need to be accounted for with your with the sensor that you're using. So I would keep that in mind. Now, if we look like at the Hugo, for instance, 6 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches, it's a large block. You might throw that on a scale and it might say 2,650 grams, and you'll put your sensor in the top and it won't reflect that exact water content that I was talking about earlier. Like gravity has an effect on all things related to matter, right? And so just because the water might move into the lower portion of the block because there is still pore space in the substrate to accommodate the water moving in. So you might see that number not exactly correlating to what your sensor's saying, but I bet your bottom dollar if you move the sensor into a lower position, you'll understand where the numbers are coming from.
Right. And Lee, you use some of these sensors, or not the e-Gro in particular, but you have other sensors that you use in your grow. Is there a particular way that you're setting them in the blocks to ensure that you have that consistency?
Yeah, you know, we have a little template cut out, and you know, make sure you put them in straight into the cube, not at an angle going up or down.
And don't wiggle them once you put them in, dang it.
Don't push them in the same hole.
Yeah.
And even over time, as you have those sensors in those cubes, and sometimes they'll get a little bit of salt buildup on them. Sometimes they'll start reading all wonky and whatnot, and you'll have to take them out, wipe them off, and probably put them into another cube to get more accurate readings.
Bingo.
Yeah. So that can, if you're seeing things that are a little out of whack and not looking correct, that might be a possibility.
Right.
I do see that quite a bit.
I think that's a super valid point, Lee, because one of the other issues we see is if you pull a sensor out of the block, you never want to put it back into the same holes, because for us, we're focusing on electrical conductivity and we want that good contact.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that being said, if you've pushed those prongs into a substrate, you've created holes, like if you pull it out, it's going to affect the reading. It might be marginal, but there's going to be an effect.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, Lee, exactly as you said, if you remove a sensor, it is probably the best practice to find another block very close by, which might change, like the calculation that you've been getting, but at least that it's a true number that you can rely on.
Absolutely. It's going to be more accurate than what you were already dealing with, before you took it out and cleaned it.
Right. And just to kind of maybe explain the method or like the reason behind or like how these things work, it is an electrical conductivity that they're measuring in between. So it's an analog electrical signal that they're measuring in between probes. And that's why I think it's so important, because you guys have calibrated it for Rockwool. Other probes, they're calibrated for other particle sizes, other CECs and densities and things like that, water holding capacity. So I think it's important for people to realize, like, if you get a soil sensor or you get a moisture sensor, ask the manufacturer what the calibration data is. And a lot of the times they may even have additional calibration points that you can, I know like the Teros 12s, you can change a couple of set points on the back end so that they work better for Rockwool. Because if I recall correctly, it's made for like a loamy soil or something. So making sure that you have the right sensors calibrated for the right media and then using them correctly, not putting them in the same holes. Like on the GrowSense, you have a level meter on the back where you know exactly on what product you should put it in on what distance, which is very nice. And one thing that I always try to iterate on these sensors is you're not looking for perfect numbers that emulate the sheets that you see online. I try to always tell them it's this that you're looking for. It's the progression of that irrigation so that you know that you're following that. And then you correlate your offset of water percentage with what you actually see real time in your plants.
On the topic of sensors, I like to talk about what I call Ben's dream. And Ben's dream is a cultivator gets, they've been working, they understand how to grow their crop, and they want to take it to the next level, so they bring in sensors. Ben's dream is that they don't make any changes based off of the sensor readings right away. I want them to put the sensors in and start gathering the data of what they were doing so well or not so well before they start making changes. And I think for a lot of people, like, that's a missed point, but like for everybody who's listening, if you get a sensor and you haven't been using one, just, accumulate some of the data so that you have something to reflect on later on, like why you had success. Don't just arbitrarily follow a number because I told you the number, right. Even, like use the tool to show you what's going on, and then we can take it to the next level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice. Can't always be relying on those sensors to make huge judgment calls for an entire room. Right. It's just not practical.
It's a window. It's like it's good data to back up your already existing good practices is the way I like to explain it a lot of times.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we're on the last slide here. I want to talk about just kind of, Lee, this is going to be a big one for you, the operational aspect of using these StoneWool products. I know that there's a lot of excitement coming out from a lot of cultivators about like switching to things like unislabs, especially considering like these are growers that have less optimal irrigation setups where they have a limit on how many shots they can do or what time of day they can do shots. I've seen the slabs work immensely well in those situations. And the slabs also allow you to use like a smaller veg substrate, which gives you a faster veg. But there's also the idea that, touch it once and let it rock. Get that plug into a Hugo and let it rock. And in a scenario where you have great irrigation capability, that kind of makes more sense. Lee, can you talk about because I know you've used slabs and all this other stuff before, like how did it work out for you?
So, like you said, in my veg team loved doing slabs because all they had to do was, pre-soak those 4x4 either the 4x4x4s or the 2.5s, and you get that good initial soak with those. We allowed for like maybe a 2-3 day dry back, and then started irrigating them, keeping them steering vegetative. But you have really fast growth in those.
In the smaller veg cubes, right?
Right. Yeah. And then, putting a little bit more work on my bloom teams, for laying out the slabs and getting them all saturated. Does take quite a bit of water, depending on how many plants you have in your room, to get those slabs completely saturated and let them sit for, a good 5-6 hours at minimum before you start draining them. We were letting them sit overnight, letting them soak in nutrient solution, and then next morning we'd come and drain them and then put our cubes back on top. But I think the biggest thing is making sure your plants coming from veg are very consistent, and then really setting a plan to get your rooting phase over that first 3 to 5 days. Make sure that's ironed out. Talk to a guy like Ben and make sure your plan's set and ready to go, and you stick to it, and make sure you get good rooting in into those slabs, and then not watering for the entire slab until those water contents get a little bit lower and those roots have really tapped into there.
That is a good point, because in a Hugo, you're going from plug to Hugo and you're good. But in the slab scenario, you do have the intermediary step. So those first couple of days when they're in that flower room, in that slab, it's almost like you got to give them a veg in place for like 3 days, like you said, for them to fully infiltrate into that slab and utilize it. And you also bring up another great point, not to just keep saturating the slab as you're trying to get that transplant to take, you can prep the slab and let them grow into that. Ben? Correct.
I was just watering in, and not for my entire slab, but just for the 4x4, trying to keep that wet, because that slab's going to really wick a lot of moisture from that smaller cube. So, trying to give the plant still what it needs while it's still rooting in, but not over saturating it and keeping that slab overly wet.
Right. Ben?
I agree 100%. For me, I usually reiterate, we want to take a measurement of where the roots are. So if we go back, Mike, and we're talking about the Hugo or even Lee, it's very common for people to take the sensor and they put it into the bottom, this bottom prongs might be an inch off the bottom of the block. That's what I call the steering position, but you don't have any roots there. So if you're irrigating based off of what's going there, yeah, it looks like your product is really wet. You're not seeing it, the dry back that you want. But if they would just move the sensor up, right at the plug level, it tells a completely different story in an item like the Hugo. And even with a slab product where you've got a block on top, we still, for a couple of days, want to be focusing on the water content in the top block. Mm-hmm. You don't want that top block to get super dry. And so, if you're taking measurements, take it off the top block while you're rooting to the slab or the other block. Once you've got your root coming in, move your sensor down the steering position.
Got it. What I think I heard you say is once
they're like the roots are, we want to be taking a measurement. So
you were breaking up a little bit there, but I think I got what you said. It's you got to make sure that as that 4x4 is seating into the slab, you're not trying to measure the water content of that slab at that point. You're trying to measure the water content of that 4x4 on the slab, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we would do as well too. We would have the sensors and the 4x4s, making sure we're getting good drybacks between there. But I wouldn't move my sensors down to my slabs, till that 5 to 7 days into bloom.
Yeah, the moisture gradient. I brought this slide back up so people remember that. Yeah, the height plays a big role in your moisture gradient, and you need to play with that height if you're adding height to your entire setup.
Yeah, it's a big thing with
that gradient. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, initially when we soak our Hugos, we'll do them in the 27-gallon totes. Make sure we have even saturation between all of our cubes. But a lot of times we won't we won't water again for anywhere from 5 to maybe 7 days just to let them root in. But we're usually sticking those sensors a little bit higher into the cube and going off that moisture content opposed to down low where there's not many roots yet, and kind of watering off that higher zone.
That's interesting. So you're almost like following the roots to ensure that they have enough water in that top gradient so that they do infiltrate the rest.
Correct.
Cool. Well, I think we went over on time. Sorry, Marco, but I feel like we could go on for hours just talking about this stuff.
No, it's all good. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's a lot of amazing knowledge. But we have about 12 minutes left, and we've got a couple questions we want to ask really quick. I'll start in the chat. Francesco, all the way from the Netherlands, is asking about what parsum you would get your first drain of the day. So what do you guys recommend there?
So for me, it's a little challenging, and we're looking at the indoor world. We're usually focusing more on like a % of dryback, or like at least we have certain value. We're not really trying to irrigate on the indoor setting in the US based on accumulated parsum. And so I don't really want to give you a number like that. And then of course, in the greenhouse world, there's in most crops, there's a % dryback that you can see in the morning before you need to irrigate. But in the indoor environment, it works a little bit differently. And usually we're trying to irrigate off of desired responses from the crop, which we do by, if you irrigate within an hour of lights on, you're going to create a vegetative response. And if you push that, that's going to be more generative. We grow cannabis in the US. I think they're able to correlate irrigation based on parsum.
Ben, you're breaking up a little bit there. I don't know if you guys know this, but Ben is in the middle of a storm right now on a 5G connection, and we appreciate you being here. Yeah, but I think what you're trying to say is like it's a little bit more different for indoor in this crop in particular, right?
Yes.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Ben. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Dude, we're glad you're here.
It's getting pretty nasty outside.
Yeah, I heard the thunder clouds clapping away while you were talking earlier. So
this question from Nick, I really want to get to your thoughts on utilizing a surfactant in the cube during the grow cycle to maintain that capacity, whether you're using a e-Gro or probably a Grow if you're thinking about using surfactants. Ben, what have you seen out in the field? I know I have some opinions about that. What do you think?
So if you want to use a surfactant from day one, that's fine. We already have one in there, but you should know that the surfactant can only reach where the water can reach. So if you find yourself in a situation where the substrate has dried back pretty far, like if you can't get the water there with a dripper or a hose, you're not going to get the surfactant there, and it won't improve, the water capacity of the crop. So it's just, you might want to use it from day one. That might help you. But if you're trying to do it retroactively, you're probably not going to see a lot of benefit. And most of the time, if you're trying to use a surfactant for a reason, someone like myself or one of my other members of my team, we can work with you to be able to eliminate that need.
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking too. In a rock wool substrate, if you have the right irrigation practices, you really shouldn't need a surfactant. Surfactants can also build up in your root zones as well, which I wouldn't want, and it can kind of take the place of good water and nutrients. So, yeah, better irrigation practices might be a better solution than surfactants. If that's the only option you have, then I would use it sparingly and really monitor the water content of your cubes as you're using it.
Yeah, I've only used surfactants in order to try and resaturate cubes that kind of hit that.
Bring them back,
and I don't think it worked the greatest, but helped a little bit, but otherwise.
Cool. Yeah. Next question from Marjan Heinzig. Based on relative changes, how much would you let the blocks dry back during the initial dryback, and how often? Only once or twice to set roots?
Okay. Just trying to think about how to wrap my head around that. Where is that question in here? I'm just looking.
It's in the chat. It's in the chat. It's toward the bottom there.
So at the initial dryback margin, I'm just wondering, are you talking about after we plug a block for the first time and we're trying to get back to a steering level? That's the way that I'm taking that.
Yeah, because you know how those blocks do take a while to, once they're at full saturation, you plug that clone in. generally it's a longer time between drybacks, especially because there's no roots infiltrated into that cube. So
right.
it's kind of relative, I feel.
That is the name of the game. So it's like, how do we dry back the substrate to a level that is steerable without like ruining the, you know, the wicking capabilities of the top layer of fiber?
Yeah.
That really is the name of the game. And so for us, you know, I think all of my colleagues would agree, even though your water content in those blocks might be high, really, how can you add water to the blocks while still drying back? And we do that by implementing very small calculated shots. They might be 1 or 2% even of the volume of the substrate that we're applying. But the goal isn't to water the plant. We're just trying to make sure that where the plug contacts the outside of the rim of the block, we want to make sure that stays moist. And we want to make sure that the roots have the ability to move into a moist area. Because if you don't have moisture there, the roots aren't going to make it there either.
Exactly. Right. And Lee, I mean, you sink plugs into Hugos all day. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, you know, so initial saturation of a cube, if you're looking at your sensors again, you know, you might see anywhere from 70 to 80% water content. I'm usually looking to see about half that for rooting in, you know, and that might take anywhere from, with a 6x6 cube, like anywhere from 4 to maybe 7 or 8 days at most. But again, I'm sticking my sensor up high into the cube, and I'm usually looking for a good 50% dry back, not 50% water content, but like 50% of what my initial saturation was.
Right.
So maybe going down to 40, 50% before I start irrigating.
That makes sense, because that's still at the cube level, probably where that plug is at. And then right as it reaches the limit, then you refill it basically, right?
Right. I'm not going off like the bottom area where you're trying to crop steer. I'm more in the middle of the cube where I'm looking for that.
That goes back to the 4x4 on the slab thing. Yeah. You want your sensor where you want your roots and where you want the most active portion of your substrate, right?
Correct.
Cool. All right. Q&A section. There is, Dominic, full saturation is recommended. It is generally. You want to saturate the blocks fully before you use them in any setting, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Fabius, I'm still working with Classic Living Soil. You want to try StoneWool, and want to know how much water and nutrition you need. It's going to be less, technically, depending on what size media you're using. In my experience, if you switch to StoneWool, you'll be able to use less water and less nutrients. You just have to control how and when you apply that better.
Yeah, and when you contact, each region has a rep, and each rep has an advisor to work with. And together with the rep, we can look at your system, we can look at how many plants you have, and we can kind of estimate how much water you'll be using based off of desired amount of shots. So you'll know whether or not you even have the capacity for your facility to irrigate with our blocks. Mm-hmm. But if you're growing in a soil type environment, usually your tanks can generally irrigate a StoneWool grow.
Cool. Last big question I see from, sorry if I butcher your name here, Ibrahima. Ibrahima asks, this is actually a big one, and he's in Germany, so this is actually more relevant. Given the strict regulations in Germany, what is the proper method for disposing the grow box after harvest? And is there Grodan reps out there in Europe that could help this gentleman?
Yes. So
gentleman, or I don't know the gender of that name. Sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
We have another Ben, actually. We have international Ben. And Ben Nakaye, he's excellent. And he actually, lives in Germany. I'm happy to connect you. And he'll be able to help you figure out how to figure out those end-of-life procedures. We have a guy, his name is Yanni. And all he does, not all he does, but like his main focus is how can we deal with regional end-of-life procedures? Because everywhere's got it differently. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., it's a little bit more problematic because cultivators are all spaced out. But if you look at somewhere like the Netherlands, where like the West End is just slammed with greenhouses, it's easy to take your product and put it on a train and take it back to be used and pushed into bricks or what have you. So you do have support. You have regional support, and I'm happy to connect you with Ben, and he'll help you figure out what to do with your product at the end of the life.
Awesome. And one last quick question from Nick Haddon. While steering generatively in the first few weeks in a jumbo and unislab in flower, the overnight dryback often requires at least 3 P2 additions by week 3. Is that a strong indicator that our substrate density is too low? I think it's more of just trying to maintain or trying to find the right irrigation parameters more than the density of the substrate. What do you guys think? I
think so. And for me, if you don't have enough substrate, usually you're irrigating at night like crazy. I think that's usually a really big indicator. And on the flip side of that, if you've got substrate and your crop isn't doing anything, you might be looking at the other end of that too.
And one thing with these Unislabs is we have the ability to choose the level of drainage we want. So what I always tell people is, like, you're going to have to run these a couple iterations and in a couple of different seasons to know exactly how much drainage you might want to cut into that, how long your irrigation cycles are, or if you need to stretch them out later into P2s and P3s.
So everybody who's listening, you can always make a hole bigger, but I'm telling you, it's very hard to make it smaller. So, like if you're in the high desert and you've got intense radiation, you might be somebody who starts with a smaller hole. But if you find that you need more drain, faster drain, you can always make it wider. Yep. Whether you're on a uni slab or a long slab, we usually recommend just one drain slit on one side of the block. You want it to drain towards the lowest side of the table. You don't want to have a reservoir built into the slab. You want to make sure that when you make your cut that the water can freely leave the slab. Those things are really going to position you for success.
Huge information. Let me reiterate that. Make your drainage cuts on slabs going the downslope direction so you are not creating a reservoir of water. Huge.
Exactly.
Cool.
Awesome. Cool. We're just about out of time. Let me see if there's any more questions here. Thanks, Joe. Joe is on with us, Artem, our East Coast rep. And then Dominic mentioned he feels like when fully saturated, Hugos take more than a few days prior to needing the next shot. Does that mean anything to you guys? Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. It like we talked about earlier, it looks like the numbers aren't really changing, but the water content at the top of the block is condensing and getting, it's that water is positioning itself into the lower end of the block. And so that gradient exists. Now, some people might not water, some people do water. For me, I usually tell people we want to irrigate from day one. I want to make sure that we're keeping the top very, keeping it moist, but I'm not doing like steering protocols. I'm not focusing on treating the crop to be like generative. I'm really just, focusing on that rooting in phase and making sure that as the roots come in, that we're replenishing the root, the nutrition right at that rhizosphere. So for us, like that's the approach that I take, but everybody does it differently. Like Lee, you might stave off a couple of days of irrigation because your build out allows that. You have certain controls to bring back a water content that other people might not have. So that works for you. And so everybody out there, you do have options. I can give you, what works for me, but ultimately we're going to look at it holistically and see what works for you too.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to, do a small shot every 4 to 6 hours or something, that initial root-in phase, you can absolutely do that and really play it safe that way. We have as much attention on these plants as, my team does. We can push those bigger, kind of more generative drybacks a little bit easier, but, absolutely playing it safe, you're going to have good results as well too.
My thing that I always like to tell people is it does seem like the cube is heavy. Get one of those cubes, put one of your AOKs in there with no plant, and then let it sit there along with all the other plants. And when you think like, oh man, it's been like 2-3 days, cut that in half. And then you'll see that the water gradient is very close to being away from where that AOK would be. So that's why even in those initial phases, maybe a couple of shots, like you said, Lee, just to get that gradient back up, find those roots so that the roots can find their way down.
Yep. So speaking of a Hugo, usually, that might be 30 mils. It might be even less, right? Like we're really just focusing on the top layer of that substrate just to stay moist so that when we're trying to steer, we have like the irrigation pathways that we want to control how the product's going to channel or release water.
And with par grows, we're ensuring that we are maintaining a water content in that upper block so we don't lose that substrate volume when we move into the plants getting bigger.
Correct.
Yeah.
Cool. And then one last question, if you guys could give a quick answer to Joseph, what irrigation pump controls do you guys recommend these days?
Oh,
too many?
One that works, brother.
Yeah. Honestly.
Yeah, we don't. I don't. Most of we see it all in different facilities, and everybody can make it work. So I'm
Depends
hesitant
what
to
your
tell you
budget is.
exactly.
Yeah, scale, budget, modularity that you want. Don't go for too much data, too much fancy stuff. Look at what your actual priorities are and then purchase off of that according to your scale. And if you want to get larger or smaller, or if you're larger or stay the same, then your scalability is a big thing too.
Cool.
One last thing, Rich, we will definitely have all of these recordings available for you guys online. Please go to the handout section and get some of these handouts and share them with your team. If you're going to run Rockwool, you're on the cutting edge of cultivation, but you have to use that knife properly, or else you're going to cut yourself. You gotta have the data and the information of running these high-speed products well for your continued success.
Very well said. Great. And then just really quickly in closing, Lee, looks like you guys are in Arizona and Michigan. Got any new strains coming out or cultivars coming out this summer?
We'll see. We just ran through 15 new ones that we're testing out right now and seeing what's going to land, but it's too early to tell. We just pulled down first round of it, so got to see what the finished product's like. But we should have some new stuff coming in, probably towards the end of summer.
Nice, cool. And then Ben, thank you for all the help and work you put into this webinar, man. Crazy knowledge. We're really appreciative of that.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and if anybody if you wants to get a hold of you directly, do you want to share your email with anyone?
Would that be easy? Yeah, I'm totally down to do that. What would be the easiest way you think to do that for everyone?
Maybe through Mike. Mike, what's your email?
Mike@growershouse.com, or you could reach out to staff@growershouse.com or support@growershouse.com, and we can get you linked up with the Grodan reps that we know, and they can get you linked up with the Grodan reps in your area.
Okay, perfect. Great. And then, yeah, quick shout out to everybody again for joining. Black Rose Cultivators has been on every one of our webinars so far. James, Webster, Arturo. Thank you all for asking the questions. Ibrahim. Oh, yeah, I don't want to try that one. For joining. Thank you all for joining. We are going to have these. We're trying to do these monthly. We just had a big tour happen on the East Coast. So, there's Ben's email if you need it. Perfect. And yeah, I guess that's it for today, guys. Ben, good luck out there in that thunderstorm of yours. And
Thank you.
Lee and Mike, I hope you stay cool out there in Arizona. I think there's another heat wave on the way. But yeah, so for those that have watched this webinar and want to rewatch it, to Mike's point, it will be on YouTube probably by tomorrow. And then it'll also be emailed to you directly as a follow-up of the recording once I kind of clean up a few things. And then, but yeah, that's it, guys. So thank you. Great webinar, great information. Thank you to Grodan and the team over there at Grodan for working with us. Great partnership that we have with you guys at Growers House. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.